Hello, this is going to be a more condensed version of the other screencast that I did on mapping where I talked about a lot of the finer points. I'm going to skip those finer points and just go through the process of applying the tool. So I'm going to go ahead and launch Persyst 14. And once that comes up on the screen, I'm going to go to the Persyst database, which can be configured. Otherwise, it'll just default to browsing the file system, but it's easier to pick files by name. And this is the ICU subtle seizure recording. It's not electrographically subtle, it was clinically subtle seizure. So electrographically, it stands out very nicely from the background EEG, which makes it a nice example to use to talk about mapping and Persyst. So to do that, we're going to go to the Tools menu. First, I'll go ahead and go to the onset of the seizure, where we want to start. Click the Tools button, we'll launch Insight 2. Insight 2 has been around for a couple of decades, but the program interface is actually a skin for the software. So what we're seeing is Persyst 14 with the Insight 2 user interface. And the other one, we're seeing Persyst 14 with the Persyst, what we call the Insight 3 interface. So these are interfaces. This one is optimized for doing analysis on the EEG. There's lots of buttons, lots of controls. So it's optimized to do that sort of work. For instance, we'll go ahead and grab a referential montage. We use an average 12. You can use the Laplacian. Bipolar montages for mapping are rarely used because they're incredibly difficult to interpret, just as if you were using a topographic map for hiking, and instead of height above sea level, it was referencing to every other point on the mountain. For each point, it would be pretty much impossible to make sense of. It would be correct for what it was representing, but we couldn't make any sense out of it. So same thing with mapping and EEG, topographic mapping. And this is going to be frequency mapping, but you can do voltage mapping as well, of course. And so the first step is to pick an appropriate reference. And whether that's a Laplacian, which tends to localize things a bit tighter, or an average reference, which is probably going to be your go-to for most mapping applications. So we can see from the EEG what's happening here. No mystery there. But mapping provides another way of representing that. And to do that, they're built in. And you can create custom ones as well pretty easily. But let's go ahead and we picked our referential montage. We picked the fast Fourier transform delta theta alpha beta map, and it appears. It's that easy. So select the referential, usually an average reference montage. Pick that, and we get a maps showing at the very bottom. Here's beta, alpha, theta, and delta, bottom to top. And this is the FFT graph for each channel, showing the amplitude by frequency, and then these lines here denote the bins that have been assigned, and we'll look at that in a moment. And all this is customizable, and you can save those customizations too and select them from the drop-down list. So this is showing the current page, and as we page forward here, I'm just going to click either to the left or right of this thumb bar on the scroll bar, and it'll jump a full page at a time. We can see that the beta is no longer showing as much map, showing that there's not as much contribution there. It's gone into the alpha as the seizure evolves from faster to slower. We're starting to see some in the theta map here. And as we go further, the alpha map will fade out, and we see it's predominantly theta at this point. And as we go further, we'll expect to see that continue on. So let's go back to the onset of this. I'll just use that navigation bar to do that quickly. So we were going a page at a time, and by default, this is going to show what's on the current page. So if we right-click here and go to Properties, this is where all these things are set. And there's other tools in here. Raw spectrum, phase encoded, Fourier spectrum analysis. You can do coherence analysis. All that stuff is underneath the right-click menu here, and from the right-click menu on the EEG page in Insight 2 for pretty much any package of Persyst. So you have that. It's doing bin analysis, and there are the bins, 1 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 13. These can be customized, loaded from a file. Main thing, let's go to data ranges, because right now it's showing the EEG page, the visible EEG page for doing these calculations. Well, let's say we wanted to pick a smaller time frame and step through the evolution of the seizure. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to right-click, Fixed position of new cursors is the default. It just means if I'm going to drop ranges on the EEG, I just want to stay where they've been put. And I can select them and average the measurements from multiple ranges or pick a single one, whatever I want to do. In this case, I want the range to follow me. And you'll see what that looks like in a moment. So I deselected the fixed position of new cursors. I'm going to do insert range, and I'm going to mark a couple of seconds. Now, FFT parameters, FFT does points per window. It's you're defining the number of points for it to calculate the amplitude by frequency. And default settings with typical scalp sampling rates, less than a second, it's going to blank out the display. It doesn't have enough points. It's editable, but again, that's getting outside the scope of what we're doing here. Happy to answer questions about that through email or create another screencast getting into that detail. But here, I've just created this range, and I can grab this gray bar at the top and move it around. But really, what I want to do is I want to move the EEG underneath that. What that looks like is when I click this arrow, the range stays there and the EEG moves underneath it. And instead of clicking the gray area, if I just use these single thin arrows at the end of the scroll bar, it's going to move just 1 second at a time. So now we're going to tell the map, the graphs, which are driven by the EEG, range selected, populate the maps. Let's right-click, go to Properties, Data Ranges, Ranges, and I could just do visible. That's the visible range. This is where you can place multiple ranges on the recording and select among them. But well, there's only one range here that I placed, and so I could pick any one of those options. And it's going to update the map accordingly. And we can see here it's narrowed its scope, so to speak. It's just looking at that piece of time here. And we can see the beta map is lit up at that point. Now, as we advance this just a second at a time, we'll see the beta fade out as the seizure begins to exhibit this evolution in frequency, where it's going from faster to slower. Now, the activity is concentrated in alpha band. And just as a quick side, we're looking down at the top of the head. That little triangle there is the nose. So we're looking down at the top. And as we go further here, we'll see that go from the alpha to the theta band maps. So this is beginning to fade out a bit, and we're seeing it starting to show up in the theta. I can jump a full page here by clicking in this part of the bar. Again, advance a second at a time. Mostly faded out of the alpha band maps and just move firmly into theta. So that's going through the evolution of the seizure with this. Now, all these parameters can be adjusted. If we right-click and go into Properties, we have a pretty comprehensive guide that we can share called the NeoPrism application notes that go into the use of all this, including these other tools in this dialog. And if you create custom ones, you can save them as an adornment montage, and then select them from the drop-down list so you don't have to configure them each and every time. So that speeds up the application of that as well. If I select NA, it goes away. And of course, under the right-click menu, there are quite a few tools available. And we've just explored the frequency domain analysis tool. So that is the application of the FFT DTAB maps that are pre-configured. Select a referential average reference, pick the tool. It appears on the right. And we made one modification to this under Properties. We set it to use, we can set it to use ranges. And if we wanted to save that, we could go to Montage, Save Adornment Montage, and I'm going to call this range. So now when I pick this, it's using the full page. And when I pick this, it's using that range that I've marked here. It's that easy to save customizations to this. Again, any questions, happy to connect by web conference. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.